I've always been the practical one. While my older brother Mark chased his entrepreneurial dreams, I focused on building a stable career. My strategy finally paid off when I landed a position at Peterson & Sons. The salary was a significant jump from my previous job, enough to make my eyes water. There was just one problem: the commute. 2 hours each way, 4 hours of my life, every single day, vanished into the black hole of rush hour traffic. After 2 weeks of this soul-crushing routine, I knew I had to find a place closer to the office. That Saturday, I went to my parents' house for our usual family dinner. Mom was in the kitchen, whipping up something that smelled divine, while Dad was glued to the news. His brow furrowed in concentration. It felt like every other Saturday night we'd had since I was a kid. "How's the new job, sweetheart?" Mom asked, placing a steaming lasagna on the table. "It's great, Mom," I replied, trying to sound enthusiastic as I helped her set the table. "The only issue is the commute. I'm thinking of finding a new place, something closer to work." That's when I noticed my parents exchange one of those looks, the kind that only couples married for 30-plus years can perfect. Mom wiped her hands on her apron and sat down. "You know, Amy," she began, "we might have a solution for you. Remember Nana Rose's old apartment? The one I inherited? The tenants just moved out, and it's practically a 5-minute walk from your new office." I nearly choked on my water. Of course I remembered that apartment. I'd spent countless weekends there as a kid, playing in Nana Rose's sun-drenched living room and helping her water the geraniums on the tiny balcony. "How much is the rent?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mom named a figure so low it made my jaw drop. It was practically a steal compared to the average rent in that area. "We'd give you a family discount, of course," she added with a wink. "I'll take it," I blurted out, not even bothering to negotiate. The location was perfect, and the price was unbeatable. "That's settled then," Dad declared, finally looking up from his newspaper. "Now, did you hear about your brother's latest venture? He just secured a huge investment for his new startup. He's going to revolutionize the online grocery delivery business." And just like that, the conversation shifted to their favorite topic: Mark's accomplishments. I sat there, picking at my food, nodding at the appropriate intervals as my parents gushed about their entrepreneurial son. It was always like this. Mark was the risk-taker, the innovator, the one who dared to dream big. I was just Amy. Moving day arrived surprisingly quickly. The real surprise, however, came when I stepped into Nana Rose's apartment, boxes in hand. Let's just say the previous tenants hadn't exactly treated the place with respect. The walls were covered in this hideous floral wallpaper, peeling at the seams like sunburnt skin. There were mysterious stains on the ceiling that looked suspiciously like water damage, and the only furniture left behind was a lumpy old couch that smelled faintly of mothballs and forgotten dreams. I called Mom that evening, perched precariously on the edge of the aforementioned couch. "Hey, Mom, would it be okay if I did some renovations?" She sounded distracted, probably engrossed in one of her home improvement shows. "Oh, sure, honey. Just don't go too crazy with the colors. You know how I am about those modern, bright things." I had to laugh. "Mom, have you ever seen me wear anything brighter than beige?" Trust me, I'm thinking more along the lines of calming neutrals. That night, I plunged headfirst into the world of online interior design. Pinterest became my new best friend. I created mood boards, browsed countless furniture websites, and even watched a few YouTube tutorials on how to properly apply wallpaper. Spoiler alert, it's way harder than it looks. My vision was clear: warm grays, soft creams, and the occasional pop of deep blue. Understated elegance, comfortable and inviting, just like me, I guess. The next few months were a blur of work and renovations. Evenings and weekends were spent stripping wallpaper, battling with paint rollers. Seriously, why is it always just one more coat? And assembling flat-pack furniture with instructions that seemed to be written in ancient hieroglyphics. Furniture shopping became my new favorite hobby. I spent hours in stores, testing out sofas, measuring spaces with meticulous precision, and comparing prices like a seasoned bargain hunter. Piece by piece, I built my home. A cozy gray sectional perfect for movie nights, a sturdy oak dining table that could comfortably seat 6, a plush rug that tied the whole living room together. The transformation took time, dedication, and a whole lot of patience. But finally, after 6 months of sweat and effort, it was done. Standing in my finished apartment, I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost brought tears to my eyes. I had done this. This was mine. When Mom came to see the finished product, I was a nervous wreck. She walked through each room slowly, running her hand along the new countertops, examining the carefully chosen light fixtures, studying the subtle pattern of the wallpaper in the bedroom. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes wide with surprise. "Amy," she said, "this is remarkable." I practically melted on the spot. Mom wasn't exactly known for her effusive praise, especially when it came to me. But there she was, actually smiling, actually impressed. "You did all this yourself?" she asked, gesturing around the living room. I nodded, trying not to look too smug. "Well, YouTube helped a lot." "It's beautiful," she said, and then she did something she hadn't done in years. She hugged me. A real hug, not one of those quick, obligatory ones she usually gave me at family gatherings. 2 weeks later, I headed to another family dinner, practically bouncing with excitement. I'd gotten a promotion at work. Senior account manager, with a fancy new title and a salary bump to match. I couldn't wait to share the news. "Mom, Dad," I announced during a lull in the conversation, "I have some exciting news. I got promoted." Mom barely glanced up from her plate. "That's nice, dear." She turned to Dad, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Have you heard from Mark today?" And that's when the real dinner conversation started. It turned out Mark's revolutionary online grocery delivery service wasn't so revolutionary after all. A bigger competitor had entered the market, some national chain with deeper pockets and a slicker app. Mark's customers were jumping ship faster than rats fleeing a sinking vessel. "We're going to help him," Dad announced, pushing his plate away. "We've decided to take out a loan." I nearly choked on my water. A loan? Look, maybe this is actually an opportunity. If he can't compete with this bigger company, maybe it's time to try something else. Starting over might be better than throwing good money after bad. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom and Dad exchanged one of their looks, not the fond, loving kind, but the one that said they were disappointed in me. Again, "You don't understand business, Amy," Dad said finally, his voice tight. "You've always played it safe with your office jobs. Your brother is an entrepreneur. He takes risks. Family always helps family," Mom added firmly. "That's what we do." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. What was the point? They'd already made up their minds. I could have announced I'd discovered the cure for cancer, and they'd still be more concerned about Mark's delivery trucks. The next 6 months were like watching a slow-motion car crash. Mom would call occasionally, with updates, though I never asked. The loan they took out bought Mark some new delivery vans and allowed him to lower his prices, but it wasn't enough. The competitor kept expanding, kept taking clients, kept pushing their fancy app and same-day delivery promises. Then came the inevitable phone call. "Your brother's company went bankrupt," Mom said, her voice strained. "He and Sarah have moved in with us. Temporarily, of course, just until they get back on their feet." I gripped my phone tighter, remembering my prediction at that dinner 6 months ago. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, because what else could I say? "I told you so?" "They're sleeping in your old room," Mom continued. "Sarah's taking it pretty hard. You know how she is about appearances." Yeah, I knew how my sister-in-law was. Sarah had always looked down her nose at my simple office job, preferring to remind everyone at family gatherings that she was married to a CEO. I wondered how she was handling living with her in-laws now that the CEO title had vanished. That weekend, I drove to my parents' house, telling myself it was just another family dinner. But the moment I walked through the door, the tension was palpable. Mark was sprawled on the living room couch, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when I entered, offering only a grunt that might have been a greeting. Sarah was perched on the armchair like it was a throne, her designer handbag placed strategically at her feet. She gave me one of her trademark looks, the kind that suggested I was something unpleasant she'd found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "Dinner's ready," Mom called, and we all shuffled to the table. I should have known better than to hope for a peaceful meal. Before I'd even taken a bite, Mark launched into a dramatic retelling of his business woes. "I had everything under control," he insisted, waving his fork in the air. "The business was growing, we were expanding. Then these corporate vultures swooped in with their fancy technology and deep pockets. They probably spent millions on marketing. How is a small business supposed to compete with that?" Sarah chimed in, pushing her food around her plate. "Exactly." Mark slammed his hand on the table, making the glasses rattle. "They're just bullies with bigger budgets, and don't even get me started on those idiots at the bank who wouldn't extend our credit line. Complete morons." "Maybe," I began, unable to hold back any longer. "Maybe this is just how business works. Competition is part of the game. You have to plan for these possibilities when you start a company." The silence that followed was absolute. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me like I just suggested we all start eating our furniture. "Easy for you to say from your cushy office job," Mark sneered. "What do you know about running a real business?" "I just think," I started, but Dad's warning look made me shut my mouth. I focused on my plate instead, pushing my mashed potatoes into neat little mounds. "I can't take living here much longer," Sarah announced suddenly, her voice dripping with disdain. "No offense," she added, not sounding sorry at all the tea, "but I need my own space." Mark immediately perked up. "Hey, Mom, what about Nana Rose's old apartment? You still own that, right?" My head snapped up. "I'm living there," I said quickly, "and I've renovated it completely." "Oh yes," Mom said, suddenly animated. "Amy's done a wonderful job with the place. It looks absolutely beautiful now." I saw the look that passed between Mark and Sarah. Quick, calculating, meaningful. Something cold and heavy settled in my stomach, but I pushed the feeling away. I was being paranoid. They wouldn't, would they? It was a Wednesday evening. I came home from work, my mind already on the leftover Thai food waiting in my fridge, and the new book I'd been eager to start. But when I reached my floor, I stopped dead in my tracks. There were voices coming from my apartment, familiar voices. I unlocked the door and stepped inside to find Mom, Mark, and Sarah, standing in my living room like they owned the place. Sarah was running her hand along the new curtains I'd hung just last week, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Mom?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "What's going on? You could have called to say you were coming over." Mom waved her hand dismissively, not even looking at me. "Don't be ridiculous, Amy. This is my apartment. I don't need permission to visit." My mouth went dry. Something about her tone sent shivers down my spine. I watched as Sarah continued her tour of my apartment, inspecting everything with the critical eye of a seasoned real estate agent. She ran her fingers along the new kitchen counter I'd installed, peered into the freshly painted bathroom, and nodded approvingly at the built-in bookshelves I'd added to the living room. Finally, she settled herself on the sofa, the old one I'd kept from before the renovation, and gave me that cat who got the cream smile of hers. "This is perfect," she declared. "We can move in next week." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Excuse me? I live here. This is my home. I renovated it." "Amy," Mom cut in, her voice sharp, "I decide who lives here. But all the work I did..." I gestured around at the walls I'd painted, the floors I'd refinished, the countless hours of labor I'd poured into this place. "I transformed this apartment." "Oh yes," Mom's smile turned calculating. "Actually, since you've improved the apartment so much, the market value has gone up significantly. If you want to stay, the new rent will be 3 times what you're paying. Now." The blood drained from my face as everything clicked into place. They'd planned this. Mom knew I couldn't afford triple the rent. My promotion was good, but not that good. "You're trying to force me out," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mom shrugged, not even bothering to deny it. "If you can't afford the new rent, you should probably start looking for another place. You have a week to move out." Without waiting for my response, they headed for the door. Sarah was already on her phone, presumably making moving plans. Mark hadn't said a word the entire time. He didn't need to. Mom paused in the doorway, but didn't turn around. "1 week," she repeated, then pulled the door shut behind them. I stood in the middle of my living room, the living room I had painted, decorated, made into a home, and felt the walls closing in. The pride I'd felt showing Mom my renovation just months ago turned to ashes in my mouth. While my family probably expected me to spend the evening curled up in a ball, sobbing uncontrollably, I was already on my phone, scrolling through rental listings. By midnight, I'd found the perfect place. A modern one-bedroom apartment just 2 blocks from my office. The rent was higher than what I'd been paying Mom, but I didn't care. First thing Thursday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. By 9 a.m., I'd viewed the new apartment. By 10 a.m., I'd signed the lease and paid the deposit. The landlord, a no-nonsense woman named Janet, raised an eyebrow when I asked if I could move in immediately, but she agreed. Next stop, a moving company. I found one that specialized in same-day moves and didn't flinch at the rush fee. While waiting for them to arrive, I went through the apartment. No, Mom's apartment, with post-it notes marking everything I'd bought with my own money. The movers arrived at 2 p.m. I stood in the living room, directing traffic like a conductor leading an orchestra. The gray sectional, mine. The dining table and chairs, mine. All the kitchen appliances except the stove and fridge, mine. Those bookshelves, I installed them myself. They're coming too. Item by item, my things went into the truck. The coffee maker I'd splurged on after my promotion, the memory foam mattress I'd snagged during a Black Friday sale, the TV I'd mounted myself after watching 3 different YouTube tutorials, everything I'd purchased to make this place a home, all of it went into boxes and onto the truck. When they finished, the apartment looked almost exactly as it had the day I moved in. Empty walls, bare floors, and that old sofa sitting alone in the middle of the living room like a captain going down with his ship. I took one last look around, remembering all the weekends I'd spent painting these walls, all the evenings I'd invested in making this place beautiful. Then I locked the door, dropped my keys in an envelope, and slipped it under my parents' front door on my way to my new apartment. I spent that night setting up my new place, arranging furniture until everything felt just right. It wasn't until the next morning that all hell broke loose. The calls started at 7 a.m. Mom, Mark, Sarah, Mom again, Mark again. I watched my phone buzz across my new kitchen counter, taking a slow sip of coffee from my relocated coffee maker. After the 6th call, I finally picked up. "How dare you?" Mom's voice exploded through the speaker. "The apartment is completely empty. Your brother and Sarah have nowhere to sleep except that old sofa. You had no right to take all that furniture." I took another sip of coffee, feeling surprisingly calm. Actually, I had every right. I bought everything with my own money. I have all the receipts if you'd like to see them. I left what was there originally. You know, that sofa you were so happy to let me use? There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Mom called me a name that would have made Nana Rose wash her mouth out with soap. The call ended with a click. Within 30 minutes of Mom's call, my phone started buzzing again, this time with message notifications. Mark and Sarah had apparently tag-teamed to blow up my Messenger app. "You vindictive witch." That was from Sarah. "How dare you take everything? You're just jealous because Mark's a real entrepreneur and you're just a paper pusher." Bart's messages weren't any better. The messages kept coming, each one more vitriolic than the last. According to my dear brother and his wife, I was greedy, heartless, vindictive, petty, cruel, selfish, and, my personal favorite, A soulless corporate drone who wouldn't know family loyalty if it bit her in the face. I read each message once, then closed the app without responding. Instead of engaging with their drama, I threw myself into settling into my new place. I arranged my furniture, decorated the walls, and started building a new life. A month passed without any contact from my family. I'd love to say I didn't think about them, but that would be a lie. Every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering how they were doing, if they'd managed to furnish the apartment, if Mom still made her famous lasagna for Sunday dinners. But I pushed those thoughts away each time they surfaced. They'd made their choice. Then, exactly 1 month after the move, my phone lit up with Mom's number. I almost didn't answer, but some combination of curiosity and lingering hope made me pick up. "The rent payment didn't come through," she said without preamble, her voice accusatory. I couldn't help it. I laughed. "Of course it didn't. I don't live there anymore, remember? You kicked me out." "That's not the point," Mom snapped. "We're expecting you to continue the payments." My laugh died in my throat. "Excuse me?" "We're having a very difficult time right now, Amy," she said, her voice softening slightly. "We're still paying off the loan we took out for Mark's business, and he can't afford to pay rent right now. The family needs your help." "Let me get this straight," I said slowly, gripping my phone tighter. "You kicked me out of the apartment so Mark and Sarah could move in, and now you want me to keep paying rent for an apartment I'm not living in just so they can live there for free?" "Family helps family," Mom said, as if that explained everything. "You know we're struggling with the loan payments, and Mark's still trying to get back on his feet." That phrase again. How many times had I heard it over the years, always when they needed something from me? Never when I needed support myself. Something inside me finally snapped. "Really? Is that what family does?" My voice was surprisingly steady. Does family kick one child out onto the street to make room for another? Does family take someone's home away and then demand they keep paying for it? "You're being dramatic." "No, Mom, I'm being realistic. For the first time in my life, I'm seeing things exactly as they are. This attitude of yours, family helps family, right? Well, guess what? I'm family too, or at least I was supposed to be." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Mom finally spoke again, her voice was cold. "I'm very disappointed in you, Amy." I actually laughed at that. "Funny, I was just about to say the same thing to you." I ended the call and immediately blocked her number. Then, in quick succession, I blocked Dad's number, Mark's and Sarah's. I opened every messaging app on my phone and blocked them there too. For good measure, I went through all my social media accounts and blocked them as well. It felt like cutting off a limb, but somehow I was finally able to breathe. Weeks passed, then months. Through the family grapevine, mainly my cousin Rachel, who'd always been decent to me, I heard bits and pieces about what was happening. Mark had apparently come up with another brilliant business idea, something about artisanal pet food delivery, or maybe it was organic food subscription boxes. Rachel wasn't quite sure. My parents were making the rounds, asking various relatives for startup money. Most of them had enough sense to refuse. Only Uncle Derek, notorious for charging interest rates that would make a loan shark blush, offered to help. Even my parents weren't desperate enough to take him up on that offer. The last thing I heard was that they were considering taking out another loan to fund Mark's latest venture. Rachel told me this over coffee one Saturday, watching me carefully for my reaction. "What do you think about that?" she asked. I stirred my latte, considering the question. 6 months ago, I would have been worried sick. 3 months ago, I would have been angry. "Now's not my circus, not my monkeys," I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. Rachel grinned. "You seem different," she said, "happier." I thought about my new apartment, decorated exactly how I wanted it, about my recent promotion at work, the one I'd celebrated with my team instead of my family, about the cooking classes I'd started taking on weekends, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when I was renovating the old apartment. "I am," I replied. "I really am." Later that evening, I sat on my couch in my apartment, with a glass of wine, thinking about everything that had happened. Mom's words echoed in my head one last time. Family helps family. They were right about one thing: family should help family, but somewhere along the way they'd forgotten that help should go both ways, that love should be unconditional, that family means supporting each other's growth, not enabling each other's failures. I took another sip of wine and smiled. I had better things to do than try to fix people who didn't want to be fixed. Much better things indeed. Story 2. Life was unremarkable in its own way. For me. My name's Rita, and at 29, you'd find me hidden away at the local library. It wasn't glamorous or thrilling, but it was mine. The dusty shelves were my domain, and the books were my friends. I wasn't one for the spotlight. I'm content to disappear into the background. The town was little, the type in which everyone was more knowledgeable than you. My everyday routine hardly altered. Wake up, work, and then home to my little flat loaded with used furniture and a stack of books. I was content with the fact that I had no social life, or so I told myself repeatedly. Ethan came into my life on a day much like any other. He had a book in mind. He said something different. His voice had the warmth of sunlight, penetrating clouds, and his smile was effortless. "Hey, do you know where I can find a book?" "I'm feeling adventurous," he murmured, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Yes. What genre are you interested in?" I asked, adjusting my glasses, trying not to get too caught up in his gaze. "I'm not sure." "Surprise me," he said, grinning as if he relished the uninteresting task he had presented to me. That marked the start of it all. Our chats were a daily occurrence for me. I would suggest titles when he inquired about books. However, such discussions quickly moved from the pages of novels to the specifics of our daily life. Ethan was unique. He listened, really listened in a way that made me feel heard for the first time in a long while. One day he walked in looking more determined than usual. "I've met no more fascinating individual in this town than you, Rita. Why do you hide in here all day?" he inquired, leaning on the counter, a light-hearted challenge in his eyes. Even my own ears found the sound of my laughter odd. Where else would I go anyway? There isn't a lot of excitement in this town. Ethan answered right away. "Perhaps all you need is a companion to explore it with." "What about tonight's dinner?" "My reward." I paused. This type of attention is unfamiliar to me. "I'm not sure, Ethan. Hurry up. What could possibly go wrong? You went out one evening with a man who appreciates the books you suggest. Plus, I promise to make it worth your while. You may show me this town's buried treasure." He coaxed his confidence. Contagious. I found myself agreeing against my better judgment. "Okay, fine. But no fancy places. All that pomp doesn't sit well with me." "Deal," Ethan said, his smile lighting up the room. "I'll come get you at 7 o'clock. Wear something comfortable." That night altered everything. Ethan showed me parts of the town I'd never seen, despite having lived here my whole life. He made me laugh, a deep, genuine laugh that I hadn't known I was capable of. He listened to my stories, my dreams, and my fears, never once making me feel small or insignificant. As we walked back to my apartment, he stopped and looked at me, a seriousness in his eyes. "Rita, I know we've only just met, but there's something about you. I've never met someone like you. You're genuine, and in a world full with fakes, it's not common." I was at a loss for words. I had never heard anyone talk to me like that before. "Ethan, He cut me off gently, placing a finger on my lips. "It is not necessary for you to speak, now that I've seen you. Rita, I can see who you are. I like what I see, too." Ethan had always been the sweet spot in my day, making everything seem brighter with his care and affection. He had this knack of making me feel recognized, calling me lovely, nice, and brilliant, things about myself that I scarcely believed. It was his warmth that won me over, making the concept forever seem not just plausible, but desired. When he proposed, it was like a dream. "Marry me, Rita. My life would be impossible without you." His eyes gleamed with earnestness as he spoke. I didn't think twice. Indeed, I exhaled out, feeling a mix of joy and disbelief. However, there was one important step we needed to do before we could get caught up in the chaos of wedding preparations. Getting to know his parents. I had received a kind of pre-warning from Ethan. "My family. They have a bit of a high bar for people I bring home, but don't sweat it, okay? When people realize how wonderful you are, they will fall in love with you," he assured me, though his nonchalance did little to assuage my concerns. Prior to the meeting, I was a complete mess. Rummaging through my wardrobe for something that screamed modest yet dignified, it felt like an impossible dress code to crack. Ethan, on the other hand, was the picture of calm, almost disinterested, as if the outcome of this meeting didn't weigh on him at all. "You're overthinking it, Rita." His casual remark, "Just wear what you're comfortable in," only made me feel more agitated. When the time came, I opted for a straightforward blue dress that I believe was well-balanced. While we were traveling to his parents' home, Ethan appeared to be more interested in the music playing on the radio than in the upcoming introduction. "You sure they're gonna like me?" I inquired, wanting some comfort. "They'll come around. Just be yourself," Ethan replied, his attention briefly flitting to me before returning to the road. His easygoing demeanor was startling in contrast to the anxiety storm that was building inside of me. Walking up to the door of Ethan's boyhood house, my heart was hammering. His earlier cautions reverberated in my mind, illustrating the level of scrutiny I would soon encounter. Ethan's parents opened the door and welcomed us, their expressions hard to read. The dinner that followed was a minefield. I was bombarded with questions from Ethan's parents that sounded more like an interrogation than a friendly dinner conversation. Ethan informs us that Rita works at a library. "Is that what you envision yourself doing in the long run?" his father inquired, sounding as though he didn't think I did a good enough job. I struggled to come up with a confident response. "I adore my job there. It's rewarding in a manner I can't fully articulate." I hoped that my enthusiasm would be sufficient to convince them. Throughout, Ethan was oddly silent and provided little assistance as I negotiated the flurry of inquiries and subtly critical remarks. It felt like I was alone on the battlefield, with Ethan retreating into a role of passive observer. As we drove home, the stillness in the vehicle was overwhelming. I couldn't help but feel disappointed, not just in the evening's events, but in Ethan's indifference. "I thought you said they'd warm up to me." I eventually broke the stillness, my voice tainted with hurt. Ethan shrugged, a frustratingly nonchalant gesture. "Rita, give it some time. All they have to do is learn more about you," he said, his words doing nothing to soothe me. After a couple more dinners that were less convivial and more like interrogations. It was clear Ethan's folks weren't my biggest fans. I suppose they thought I was some sort of gold digger, which is completely untrue. Ethan's money was never my goal. Heck, I barely knew about it until he brought it up himself one evening, saying, "My parents are a bit old school. Do you know? They worry about the oddest things like money and prestige." One night, Ethan came home looking more serious than usual. "Babe, we need to chat." He spoke without looking at me. I realized then that something was wrong. "What's the matter?" I inquired. I can feel my stomach knotting up. "It's my parents." He started finally gazing at me. "A prenuptial agreement is being insisted upon." "A prenuptial agreement?" The word tasted bitter and alien to my tongue. "You are aware, Ethan, that I don't give a damn about your money?" He sighed, running his hands through his hair. "Yes, I am aware, and I don't care about it either. Not in the case of us. They're adamant about it, though. They believe it will protect us both or something. I was hurt, not going to lie. They seem to be placing bets on our downfall already. But I loved Ethan more than I cared about his parents' approval or some stupid agreement. All right, I stated more forcefully than I intended. Let's just sign it and move on. Your money, my funds. In any case, I don't care. I just want you. Ethan looked relieved, and a part of me hated that. I'm grateful, sweetie. This is only a piece of paper, and I detest it just as much as you do. It won't affect anything between us. So we signed the darn thing. It was drafted by a lawyer his parents knew, who made sure that in the event that things went wrong, neither of us could touch the other items. Before we even got started, it was like signing a statement of distrust, but I pushed those thoughts away. I had fallen in love, and it was said that love will triumph. Okay, our wedding was nothing extravagant, just the way I wanted it. The promise of eternity, a small ceremony, and a few close friends. Soon after, I moved into Ethan's house. The home was pleasant. It wasn't particularly fancy, but it felt very different from my previous apartment. Ethan's parents lived nearby, which I soon found out meant surprise visits that were more about checking up on me than anything else. Life with Ethan started off like something out of a fairy tale, but it wasn't long before the gloss started to fade, revealing the grim reality beneath. Although the change took time, the indications were present and gradually undermining our progress. His mother, Linda, was the first break in our ideal image. She had unexpectedly stopped by, looking around the place as if she were taking stock. Remember, this is Ethan's house. Everything here is his. I tried to maintain my calm answering. I know, Linda, your son's belongings are not my concern. I love him, she scoffed. Love doesn't pay the bills, sweetheart. Just keep in mind that you take what you brought with you if you ever leave. Nothing. She once marched through the house, pointing off every item of equipment, piece of furniture, and trinket that Ethan had. You see this couch? That artwork is Ethan's. Ethan's too. In case everything goes wrong, keep dear in mind. None of it is yours to claim, she remarked, her voice filled with deadly honey. It was as if she liked reminding me of my status in their society. George, Ethan's father, wasn't much better. He and Linda behaved as though they were the owners of our home, not merely going to visit. They wanted coffee the instant they stepped in. You sit in front of the TV and want me to wait on them hand and foot while you criticize how I managed to make it through 2 or 3 weeks. Grab us some of those chips, will you? While you're at it, how about washing the clothes that are piled up in the corner? George would say that without even glancing at me. The worst thing? Ethan didn't voice any opposition to it. Along with the laughter, he would add his own quips. Yes, she's still learning how to do things right around here. Give her time. I felt like I was losing my mind. I wasn't married to this man. It was someone else, someone harsh and contemptuous. Do you even hear yourself? How can you let them treat me like this? When Ethan's parents were gone, I would confront him. They're just set in their ways, darling. You are aware of how elderly folks are. He would dismiss it, giving the impression that I was the one who was going overboard. By it, they mean nothing. Plus, we're on their money. It's hardly possible to bite the hand that feeds, is it? I felt like I was slapped in the face by that statement. That was it. I was just the freeloader, the girl who married into their small kingdom and had to play by their rules or go out. My job at the library, which I loved, was a joke to them. Just one more excuse to despise me. The days blurred into each other, each one is a reiteration of the previous one, until that ordinary Tuesday when everything was different. I was doubled over at work when I felt a searing ache in my stomach while I was stacking books. It wasn't simply stress. It was something more. A worse thing. Before I knew it, I was in the hospital, the sterile fragrance of antiseptic flooding my nose, lying on that hospital bed. I kept thinking that this was a new low, in agony, alone, and not a single message or call from Ethan. Just when I thought things couldn't get much darker and tap on the door welcomed a guest I never expected. Rita Turner, the guy at the door, was dressed in a suit, clutching a briefcase, looking wildly out of place in the clean hospital room. Yes, I am that. Who are you? My voice sounded feeble, exhausted by the suffering and the never-ending cycle of letdown. I'm Michael Johnson, a notary. I have something important to discuss with you. His tone was stiff, yet there was something in his gaze that made me want to listen. I gestured for him to go on. Despite the circumstances, curiosity was aroused. It's about your great-uncle, Edward Turner. You're his only heir, Rita, and he died not long ago. You inherited something from him. The words didn't make sense at first. Are you sure you've got the proper person? I haven't seen him for 15 years. Michael gave a nod. Quite confident he was a private man, but always recalled you wanted to make sure you were taken care of. I watched as the notary got ready to go into the details of my great-uncle's will while I lay in the hospital bed, feeling both confused and excited. He opened his briefcase, spread out the papers in front of him, and cleared his throat. Rita, your great-uncle, was a man of substantial wealth and taste. He left you quite the inheritance. But money isn't the only thing at stake here. There's lots of that. $20 million to be exact. With a calm, matter-of-fact tone, Michael started. Still trying to make sense of the numbers, I blinked. $20 million, I echoed, feeling my voice crack. That's correct, he continued, undeterred by my disbelief. There's more, though. Additionally, you're inheriting stock in a number of big businesses. These are not small expenditures. We're discussing large investments in some of the most dependable and successful companies in existence. As I tried to grasp the significance of what he was saying, my thoughts raced. It felt like a dream to own stock in businesses I had only heard about on the news. The property is another, Michael continued, paging through the documents. An historic, huge mansion in one of the most elite regions. Rita, it's not just any house, it's a historic home on acres of property. And now you have it all. I made an effort to visualize the home, the type of setting I had only seen in films. To put it mildly, it was overwhelming. Don't forget about the antique car, he said, smiling slightly, as though he was expecting my response. It's a collector's dream, a classic that has been completely restored and is in perfect shape. I laughed, the whole thing seeming unreal. 2 vintage cars. With that, what will I do? As it is, I seldom ever drive. Michael's smile broadened. You are free to do with it as you see fit. Perhaps give it a try sometimes. Then there are the interior artwork and furnishings, real antiques, some dating back hundreds of years. The finer things in life were something your great-uncle had a knack for. The space seemed more intimate. They have more thickness, while I attempted to process what he was saying. I have a fortune that I inherited. A business, a home, a vintage vehicle, and a collection of furniture and artwork. That isn't possible. Rita, it's all yours. Taking good care of you was something your great-uncle wanted to do. He seemed to have seen something unique about you. Unique? I didn't feel that way. Particularly after the first few months of my life, lying in a hospital bed, I was bestowed with a legacy I was unaware of, despite being a multimillionaire. I'm grateful, Mr. Johnson. This is a lot to take in. I don't even know where to start, I acknowledged, feeling a mix of thankfulness, amazement, and an overpowering sense of duty. One step at a time is how we will go, he assured me. I'm available to assist you at every stage. Just like clockwork, my phone buzzed. For the first time in days, Ethan's name appeared on the screen. I ignored it and looked back at Michael. Now what? The inheritance belongs to you, but we'll have to handle some paperwork. Rita, a big shift is coming to your life. It changed. Ethan and his parents changed their ways once the unexpected riches dropped in my lap. Or so it appeared. Their daily trips to the hospital resembled cheesy movie sequences. Ethan, who had previously been too lazy to come check on me, lingered around me all the time, fiddling with my blanket while wearing a worried frown. "How do you feel right now, love?" His eyes would be blinded by the richness of his voice as he asked. If anything, his mother, Linda, was even more theatrical. "When you get home, darling, I'll make your favorite lasagna." She responded, "Just wait," with a broad smile that stopped short of her eyes. Everything was too much, still too abrupt. I complied, grinning pathetically, and thanked them for their concern without raising any red flags. I was urged to see past their actions, so I did it one day. My pulse thumping with each step, I pulled myself out of bed and followed them after their usual visit. I hid behind a corner and listened to their real selves emerge. Without a crowd to entertain, the first thing I heard was their laughing, startling and harsh. "Do you realize how simple it is? She's incredibly foolish. She is consuming food directly from our hands." A laugh slipped out of Ethan's mouth. As she outlined their strategy, Linda's voice was piercing and more calculated. "Ethan, make sure she has a child with you. Once she does, she won't ever be able to leave us. After that, we'll actually be able to control her and her wealth." I was not shocked by their cold and cruel words. I was overcome with disappointment. Yes, but surprise. Not in the least. Their genuine selves were exposed. In shades of denial, I finished painting over them. Silently, I made my way back to my hospital bed, their mocking words fueling a fire within me. They viewed me as a way to guarantee their future and a ticket to riches. However, I refused to play their game. Not one. As I lay on that bed, a plan started to form. Firm and unambiguous. I intended to reverse the situation for Ethan and his cunning family. They didn't take me seriously. Sam was weak, but I was about to show them exactly how wrong they were. Back at the house after being discharged, I felt like a stranger stepping into what was meant to be my home. Fake worry and desire were plastered on Ethan's and his parents' faces while they waited. The atmosphere was heavy, packed with unspoken tension and expectation. The first to speak, Ethan's voice was a mix of underlying avarice and fake kindness. "Sweetheart, you're at home. How are you feeling? We've been so worried about you." Disregarding my throat lump, I looked directly into his eyes and saw the man I had assumed to be familiar. "I'm feeling better. Thank you, but we must speak. All of us." Despite the chaos within, I spoke steadily. Ever the actress, Linda took the stage. As though in prayer, she clasped her hands together. "Of course, my love, we are available to you. Anything you require. It was either now or never." I spread out my cards after taking a big breath. "Ethan, I'm divorcing you, and before you inquire, no. My inheritance will not be shared with you." There was silence in the room. Like a vacuum, the air was drawn out of it. Ethan's mask came off, exposing the terror behind it as his face became pale. Separation. However, why? I believed that we were content. Joyful? In my mouth, the word tasted better. "You, your mom, and your dad have made my life a living nightmare. I've been treated more like a servant than a wife by you? And all of a sudden you're worrying about me because you think I'm valuable?" Ethan faltered, unable to find the right words, while Linda always plunged right in. "This is absurd. You've always been like family to us. You're dreaming, my love." I'm rolling my eyes. I waved the prenuptial agreement at him after taking it out of my luggage. I was rescued by this. You believed you could trick me. However, I'm not the innocent girl you thought I was. George. Up until now, nothing. At last he spoke, his tone a mixture of despondency and rage. "This is something you'll regret. Your family is us." No. I never considered you family. When money is involved, a family does not treat one of its members like dirt and then become kind. I'm done here. Moving into my own house was the breath of fresh air. I was in dire need. In sharp contrast to the world I had left behind, the flat was compact and comfortable. It was more than simply a new place to live. It was my proclamation of freedom, my fresh start. It was almost instantly a phone call. It was Ethan who broke the stillness first, his voice brimming with desperation. "You have to return, Rita, please. We can resolve this. We can, I'm sure." His cries were ignored. No amount of pleading could change the fact that I was done. "Ethan, it's finished. I'm not returning. You must come to terms with that." With a stern tone that left no space for compromise, I said. "Shortly after," Linda added, her voice a poisonous tangle of remorse and rage. "Ungrateful. You owe us for everything we've done for you." "Rita, you're making a grave error." "What do I owe you, Linda?" "For treating me as though I were a burden." "No, I have nothing to repay you. Farewell." It seemed like a huge weight was being dropped as I hung up on her, a last snip from the bonds that chained me to a life of pain. The divorce was a relief, a fresh start after a history that had threatened to overwhelm me. I was informed of the discord between Ethan and his parents by true friends. I didn't miss the irony. Their family conflict now stemmed from the prenuptial agreement, which they had insisted on, with my great-uncle's estate safely in my possession. Generosity gave me a sense of purpose. A sizable amount was donated to causes that were important to me, causes that would make a difference in the world. However, the bookstore, a welcoming sanctuary for fans of rare and vintage books, became my passion endeavor. It was my method of reconnecting with the world on my terms. My path hadn't been easy, fraught with hardships and anguish, but I knew I had found my happily ever after as I stood in my bookshop, surrounded by the tales of innumerable others. It was more than simply letting go of the manipulation by Ethan and his family. It was about rediscovering who I was and what I liked. Cheers to fresh starts. One tranquil evening after shutting my store, I toasted to myself. It was my path to take, even though the path ahead was unknown, brimming with opportunities and the prospect of a fresh sense of fulfillment. Story 3. In a flash, life can change drastically. 1 minute you're 32, happily married and planning your future. You're a widow the next day, sorting through cremation options because your husband's body was too damaged to have an open casket. Karen, that's what happened to me. 6 months ago, my husband James died in a car accident that left me drowning in grief and struggling to find my footing in this new reality. Funeral preparations, comforting phone calls, and restless nights filled the first few weeks. I don't know how I would have handled the funeral arrangements if it weren't for my parents taking over most of them. "We've made all the arrangements with the funeral home, Karen, honey." Mom had spoken in a softer tone than I had ever heard. "For now, you simply concentrate on yourself." My lifeline was the support group for those who had lost loved ones. Every Tuesday evening, I'd sit in a circle with people who knew the hollow aching in my chest. "Some days are tougher than others," I revealed at one session, my voice barely above a whisper. "I occasionally wake up and momentarily forget he's gone." Squeezing my hand, Maria, another group member who lost her spouse 2 years ago, reached across. "That's typical, my dear. Waves of anguish wash over you." As the months went by, I began to deal with real-world issues. James had given me a large bank account, an apartment downtown, and a suburban home of our own. The idea of spending the entire day sitting by myself in our empty house made my skin crawl, even though I could have resigned my work at the marketing agency. I changed to working part-time instead, just enough to keep my mind busy. The most unexpected shift was in how I interacted with my parents. Growing up, I'd always felt like an afterthought compared to my younger sister, Sarah. They never missed her school performances or dancing recitals. However, my academic accomplishments hardly merited a congrat. However, when they requested if I could provide them with a $1,500 monthly transfer to support them financially, after James passed away, something changed. I agreed without hesitation. My parents' weekly meals had developed into a reassuring ritual. Mom would prepare her well-known pot roast, Dad would pour the wine, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. I felt like I had their undivided attention for the first time in my life. Karen, please elaborate on the new project you are engaged in. Dad would remark that he was, for once, genuinely interested in my work. The marketing campaigns were going well, and I was relishing these moments of intimacy. Although everything changed, my employer believes it might attract a number of new clients. My younger sister, who was 7 months pregnant, entered the room the night Sarah joined us for supper, and her presence instantly took over the room as it usually did. I hadn't seen her since James's funeral, and she had been renting a flat across town. "Sarah? Sweetie? Take a seat here." Mom came first, almost shoving me aside to give her favorite daughter more space. "Do you require an additional pillow? Do you have swollen feet?" As simple as that. Once more, I was invisible. It was like witnessing a switch flick. All of their emphasis abruptly shifted to Sarah and her pregnancy. I felt the old pain of being ignored return to my chest. I foolishly believed that I had left behind an old friend. Who is the father, then? I tried to participate in the discourse by asking throughout supper, "Have you mentioned the baby to him?" Sarah grew gloomy. "That's my business." She pushed her piece about her plate and broke. "I don't have to divulge every aspect of my private life." Mom quickly went to her defense. "Don't pry, Karen. There is no need for your sister to defend herself." When I was undergoing fertility treatments, I couldn't help but note how different this response was. Back then, they'd had no difficulty asking updates and delivering unwanted advice on my personal life. But how are you intending to manage on your own? As I saw her pile seconds onto her plate during another supper, I pressed, "Infants are costly." Sarah waved her hand dismissively. Her lips were moving in that familiar sneer. "Don't be concerned about my child. Nobody will need anything from us. I have everything worked out." I ought to have focused more on that enigmatic smile. However, I've witnessed that much too often. Sarah was constantly coming up with methods to get rich quick that never worked out. The 2-week-long organic smoothie enterprise. She never completed the life coaching certification, the Bitcoin investment that lost her 3 months' rent. "Trust me," she continued, stroking her abdomen with an air of assurance that should have set off warning bells. "Everything is going to go according to plan this time." Dad smiled at her as if she had just revealed a cancer cure. That's my gal, always landing on her feet. I tried to ignore the usual sensation of coming in second as I took another piece of pot roast. I reasoned that certain things never change, observing my parents' perseverance. Anything Sarah says. It was a Tuesday morning when Sarah called. Her name appeared on my phone as I was studying marketing reports at my desk. It nearly went to voicemail. Normally, our chats were unpleasant and short, but for some reason I had to respond to Karen. She only used that beautiful, syrupy voice when she was demanding something. "Next weekend, my baby shower will be held at my parents' house. It would be really appreciated if you could attend." The invitation was unexpected. Even during James's burial, when we had last had a meaningful talk, she appeared preoccupied and uneasy. "Are you certain?" Unable to conceal my amazement, I inquired. The amount of times Sarah had willingly involved me in anything I could count on one hand. She laughed, of course. The sound strangely strained. "My only sister is you. Without you, it wouldn't be right. In addition, I have a unique plan." My gut nodded at something in her voice, but I ignored it. "I'll be present." I said I would. I've already made a mental list of potential presents. Perhaps she was attempting to close the distance between us with this? The next Saturday, I brought a handmade blanket, a high-end baby monitor, and 2 meticulously wrapped packages to my parents' house. This was going to be my niece or nephew, regardless of our differences. It was as though a colorful explosion had occurred there. There are blue and pink balloons everywhere, a tall diaper cake, centerpiece, and streamers dangling from every available surface. Have faith in Sarah to make this an occasion. Margaret was present with her girls, and it appeared that she had invited nearly the entire town. Sarah's former college classmates gathered around the punch bowl, laughing over some shared memories, while Mom's bridge club acquaintances claimed the sofa. As she made her way through the crowd in a flowing, pregnant dress that most likely cost more than my rent each month, Sarah declared that it was time for games. She looked radiant, yet I felt uneasy because of the predatory quality of her grin. She continued looking at me from the other side of the room, maintaining eye contact for a little too long. We played all the classic baby shower games, including guessing the baby's birth date, measuring Sarah's tummy with thread, and that awful game with the melted chocolate bar and nappy. Sarah looked to be more annoyed by my victory in the belly measuring competition than she should have been. Throughout it all, she kept shooting these strange looks my way like she was waiting for something, following the opening of the presents. Sarah arrived at my gift, swooning theatrically over every onesie and baby device. She raised the blanket and ran her fingers over the elaborate design. Then, to get attention, she clinked her glass. The room became quiet, and my heart began to race uncontrollably. I could give a name. Suddenly, the air seemed heavy, hard to breathe. Thank you to everyone who came today. With one hand on her large tummy, she started, I must mention something else, though. I think it's time everyone learned who the father of my baby is. My heart began to race. Sarah's eyes met mine, and I knew then and there, I was aware before she even spoke. That did not, however, decrease the effect. The dad. She added, "This is James Wilson, Karen's late husband," her voice echoing across the suddenly quiet room. The screaming in my ears caused the world to tilt sideways. Margaret's fingers sprang to her lips as I heard the visitors whispering and gasping. With anxious whispers, Sarah's college pals drew closer to one another. The lack of astonishment on my parents' expressions, however, was what really got to me. They were aware from the beginning. James's kid is his sole heir, so before I could comprehend what was occurring, Sarah was talking again, her voice brimming with joy as she turned to face me. "Karen, I'm entitled to half of what he left you. The flat, the house, the cash. My child is worthy of inheriting their father's wealth." The room whirled. I steadied myself by holding onto the back of a chair. Then, like bodyguards, Mom and Dad moved forward to stand on either side of Sarah. "Karen," stated Dad in a firm, businesslike tone, "you must act morally in this situation. Your nephew is deserving of the inheritance left by his father." But I did find my voice. It sounded like a rasp. "You're telling lies. You're all lying. James would never do it." Oh no. When Sarah took out her phone, her grin went sour. "How would you then explain these?" My world fell apart again when she held up the screen. They were there. In what appeared to be a hotel room, James and Sarah were kissing while encircled in each other's arms. They were seen holding hands in a restaurant in another picture. Sarah said, her voice echoing through the quiet room. "I didn't realize he loved me." "Did he intend to abandon you for me?" "We intended to inform everyone." Then she started to choke, tears running down her cheeks. Then all of our intentions were dashed by the accident. I was unable to think or breathe. Automatically, my body gathered my bag, pushed past the gasps of whispers, and staggered out to my car. I was already driving out of the driveway when I heard my mother yelling after me. It was a blur on the way home. I continued going over those pictures in my head, attempting to figure out what they meant. Those business meals must be when the restaurant images were taken. "I have the hotel," he said, most likely on one of his many business travels. My phone started vibrating as soon as I went through my front door. Sarah was messaging, dozens of them, screenshots of her and James's talks. I no longer love her. It's been a while since I did. After the divorce, we'll notify everyone. I want to be with you and no one else. I'm eager for us to begin our lives together. I kept seeing messages on my screen. In my heart, each one is a new knife. Conversations dating back months were displayed by the timestamp. While I was undergoing reproductive therapy, my sister and husband were planning their future, thinking that I was the source of our marital issues. I wondered if our entire existence together had been a lie as I paced my house that night, touching James's belongings. My parents called me for the first time at 7 a.m. sharp. I waited for 4 rings before responding. "You have to be reasonable about this, Karen." Dad started not even bothering with a greeting. "It will be simpler for everyone if you agree to divide the inheritance as soon as possible." His tone of nonchalant superiority made me feel less angry. "For whom? For Sarah?" "For you, for us all," Mom added. I was on the speakerphone. "Sweetheart, you don't want this to get messy. When did you learn about them when the news was little more than a whisper?" A pause occurred, the sort of pause that conveys all the information you require before a single word is uttered. "We've been acquainted for some time." At last, Mom gave in. It had been roughly 6 months since James told us, long before the mishap. The timeline struck me with the force of a physical punch. 6 months. At his burial, they allowed me to cry on their shoulders even though they had known me for 6 months. Despite being aware of what he and Sarah had done, they continued to collect my money each month. Traitors. On my tongue, the word seemed definitive and frigid. "You, everyone." I blocked their numbers and hung up. I canceled the monthly transfer to their account without hesitation, even though my hands were shaking when I accessed my banking app. Allow them to request money from their beloved Sarah. Missed calls and unanswered texts clouded the course of 2 weeks. Then Sarah's email arrived. If I didn't willingly give up half of everything, she would sue me. Never before had the term voluntarily seemed so much like a curse. I couldn't bring myself to respond, couldn't stand to consider James's treachery. How many people must have been aware of it? I must have seen them together, as I stayed in ignorance. At work, the whispers got intolerable. Some coworkers had pitying glances, while others had barely disguised smirks. After I broke down during a client meeting, my boss, Tom, who was also one of my few remaining close friends, invited me into his office. "Take a break," he urged softly. "Is it paid or not? Whatever suits you. When you're ready to return, your job will be waiting for you." That same day, I packed away my desk and nodded appreciatively. I became a recluse in my own house, and the following few weeks melted into one another. I ordered groceries, turned my head away from the ringing doorbell, and stared at old pictures for hours in an attempt to find the clues. I must have overlooked it. Now every pleasant memory seemed like a joke. The fact that he had been having a second life with my own sister tarnished every minute of our marriage. Facebook was the source of the news. Sarah had given birth to a son. The picture depicted our parents looking happily at their new grandchild as she was grinning in a hospital bed. The baby was wrapped in the cream-colored blanket I had knitted for the shower, which felt like a deliberate jab. I closed the app before I could read the remarks, but not before realizing she'd called him James Jr. The hefty manila envelope containing the court summons arrived a week later. I opened it with shaking hands because I knew what would be inside. Sarah was claiming her son's right to his father's inheritance and was suing for half of what James had left me. Her demands were laid out in stark black and white in the legalese, which was precise and cold. She wanted a piece of the downtown flat, half the money, and the home. After 3 days of investigation, I decided on Richard Martinez, who was well regarded for managing intricate inheritance issues. His look was deliberately bland as he shuffled through the papers on his desk and murmured, "Miss Wilson, I must tell you the truth. Text messages, pictures, witness accounts, and even your own parents' statements provide strong proof of your sister's long-term relationship with your late husband. He stopped and adjusted his wire-rimmed spectacles. Evidence of a close relationship with a biological kid is necessary in inheritance cases such as this one. The courts are generally empathetic. My phone rang that night as I was still absorbing this heartbreaking news. Unknown figure. Hi there, is this Karen Wilson? The voice of a woman, strange but somehow evoking a sense of familiarity. There was something in the rhythm. My heart skipped a beat at the tone. I am James's mother, Elizabeth Parker. The world slanted to one side. I held onto the kitchen counter for balance. That isn't feasible, I muttered. James was left an orphan. He told me his parents died when he was young. His upbringing was in foster care. He's lying again. Her voice, I fear, was resentful, but not cruel. Are you open to meeting with me? You need to be aware of certain things that might be useful to you. The next morning, we planned to meet in a little cafe downtown, neutral territory. When she stepped in, I almost spilt the coffee I had bought since I was upset and had arrived early. The likeness was striking. James had her smile, her eyes, and even her demeanor. She moved with the same fluid elegance I'd always loved in him. After we had taken a seat in a corner booth, away from prying eyes in the back row, wearing a black dress and veil, she added, I was at the funeral. I couldn't force myself to approach you. Next. It had been years since James and I had spoken. Suddenly, I recalled her. The one person who had sneaked away before the service was over. I had been too preoccupied with my own sorrow to be curious about her identity. At this point, however, the memory became crystal clear. The sophisticated ebony woman, with a thick veil covering her face, stood aside from the other mourners. Why have you come forward at this time? I asked, attempting to avoid seeming suspicious. I have a hard time trusting anyone or anything associated with James after all the recent disclosures. A manila envelope, ragged at the edges as though it had been carried around for a long time, was taken out of Elizabeth's handbag. Because, in spite of everything, I can't allow another woman to be harmed by my son's falsehoods, and because I've heard what your sister is saying. She passed the envelope across the table with shaking hands, her fingers quivering a little. Elizabeth handed me an envelope, which I opened. It contained Boston General Hospital medical records from a decade ago, around a year before James and I were married. I felt the blood drain from my cheeks as I looked over the page. Complete SOS. For Mia. Permanently sterile, no chance of a natural conception. Each of the clinical terms struck me like a new blow. At the age of 25, James had these examinations. Elizabeth gave a quiet explanation. The outcome saddened him. It was among the final topics we talked about before our disagreement. I was unable to talk about the years of hormone injections, incessant medical visits, fertility therapies, tears, and self-blame. It had all been a vicious act. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was crowded. With our parents protectively flanking her, Sarah sat in the front row, holding baby James Jr. She had practiced the expression of grief, worn a black dress, and applied little makeup to portray the role of the mourning, nearly widowed woman. She performed brilliantly for the gallery when she took the stage. She talked about how much she loved James, tears sparkling in her eyes. Her voice broke as she said, "All I want is what's fair for my son. He merits the heritage left by his father." My lawyer, Mr. Martinez, waited until she'd finished her act before he spoke. "I would want to present proof, Your Honor, that Mrs. Thompson's entire assertion is false." He carried the medical records over to the bench. The documents were examined by the court. Her face remained fixed. Sarah's attorney immediately raised concerns over the legitimacy of the documents and the chain of possession. Sarah lost her temper. She clutched the infant and screamed, "Those documents are fake." Nearer, "She faked them in order to take the inheritance of my child." "Your Honor, Mr. Martinez proceeded quietly. Mr. Wilson was sterile, according to these medical records. To prove paternity, we ask for a DNA test. Sarah's smile was victorious. That isn't feasible. James's corpse was cremated. He was an orphan. Mr. Martinez pointed to the gallery and stated, "There's really no one to test against. Let me present you to James Wilson's biological mother, Elizabeth Parker." A murmur swept across the courtroom as Elizabeth stood. I could even see Sarah's face going pale from where I was sitting. To find out if this youngster is my grandson, Elizabeth made it plain that she was prepared to submit to a DNA test. The magistrate gave a nod. "A DNA test is ordered. When the findings are in, we'll get together again." Sarah shifted in her chair a little. I will remove the color from her face. With a fierce glance at me, our mother hurried to her aid, but I felt optimism for the first time since this nightmare started. As the judge unsealed the envelope carrying the results of the DNA test, there was silence in the courtroom. Unaware of the drama going on around him, Sarah sat stiffly on her chair as the baby slept soundly in her arms. The findings unequivocally demonstrate that the court said, in a forceful and unambiguous voice, that Mrs. Elizabeth Parker and the young child had no genetic ties. Therefore, it may be determined that James Wilson was not the father of this kid. The room emitted a collective gasp. With mascara streaming down her cheeks, Sarah's face sagged as she started crying. The judge's voice had grown harsh. "Miss Thompson, would you mind telling the court why you committed this fraud?" Sarah's voice was no more than a whisper as she held the infant closer. "When James passed away and was cremated, I was seeing a number of men. I believed that no one would ever find out that I needed his money. You tried to con your own sister then?" You could feel the judge's disdain. Exploited her parents as unintentional co-conspirators. Sarah murmured, "I just wanted security for my baby." But her performance was no longer powerful. When they finally realized how deceitful she was, even our parents looked shocked. The judge's decision was prompt and clear. This court rules in favor of Karen Wilson, the defendant. Sarah Thompson's claims to James Wilson's inheritance are all rejected with prejudice. You're lucky, Miss Thompson, that Mrs. Wilson hasn't filed a criminal complaint for attempting to defraud the courthouse. My parents came up to me. Mom was in tears. My father appeared older than I had ever seen him. "Karen, my dear." Mom grabbed my hand. We were unaware that Sarah was lying. "We can put this right. Since you discontinued the monthly payments, we've been having trouble." I extended my hand. "Don't. Simply don't." I took out my phone, immediately blocked their numbers, and left without turning around. By my car, Elizabeth was waiting. "Are you all right?" Softly, she inquired. I laughed, which shocked me. "Do you know what I believe I am, or I'll be?" I inhaled deeply. James left me the flat downtown, and I've been thinking about it. I never really enjoyed it. Too many memories. However, perhaps you might enjoy it. Her gaze expanded. "Karen?" "No, there was no way I could," I pleaded. "Please. You used those medical documents to save my life. In exchange, let me offer you something." A week later, she started weeping when I gave her the keys. "I never believed I'd have a daughter," she muttered as she held me. 3 months have passed since then. My family still reaches out to me through distant cousins and shared acquaintances, but I've severed my relationship with Sarah and sent a letter saying she's changed, that she's sorry, and that she needs assistance with the baby. I tossed it away without opening it. Elizabeth and I have weekly meals instead. As we exchange tales about James, we're learning to know one another, both the positive and negative. She is assisting me in seeing that he was not the man I had assumed him to be. That doesn't take away from the joyous times we had yesterday. At last, I put James's belongings away. As we worked, Elizabeth assisted me in storing some in the attic and donating others to charity. Before the lying started, she told me stories about James when he was a little lad. The existence of that version of him was somehow helpful. I've begun living again, but I'm not yet ready to date. I joined a hiking group, went back to work full-time, and am organizing my first trip alone. I can hardly recognize the woman staring back at me in the mirror at times. You're always surprised by life. I acquired a new family but lost the one I was born into. It was unexpected. I didn't design this life. Perhaps, however, this is the life I was always destined to lead.